Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about Patrick Rothfuss in general and my opinions on the whole him not writing anything thing. So, The Slow Regard of Silent Things is a novella which was released in 2014 by Patrick Rothfuss and is the last thing, as far as I know, that he published. So that was almost 7 years ago now. I didn't read The Slow Regard of Silent Things when it came out, but I did read it this past month because my friend Daniel put it as a secret submission into my magic hat that I was picking my random TBR books out of. So I was kind of happy that he put that because it's something that I always felt like I should read, but just had never really gotten around to. The main reason for it, honestly, is because I just don't read a lot of novellas and shorter fiction. It's just never been something that has appealed to me all that much. The premise didn't necessarily push me away, but it wasn't something that I felt really excited to read either. But it was something that I was always aware that I probably should get to this at some point, and I just had never really gotten around to it. So I am glad that I got to it this month. And I had a very mixed reaction to it. It feels like a very hard book to rate and review because, to a certain extent, the author is very clear about what kind of a story it is. He gives this very long disclaimer at the beginning about how this story is not going to be for everyone, and he has another thing at the end about how this book came into being and how it's not for everyone and how some people won't like it. And I think he was very aware of how this book would get received. And I think his fears were pretty well founded. If you look at it on Goodreads, you will find a few people that really loved it, and you also will find a lot of people that were really angry that he published this instead of another book in the main trilogy, or people that are really angry because it doesn't have a plot. And I feel like he was pretty clear about what kind of book this was. He was pretty clear that it does not have what would traditionally be considered a story. It's about a side character from The Name of the Wind and follows her for a few days and what she is doing. There are no other human characters in the book. It's mostly her interacting with inanimate objects and going about her business. So if you need some kind of actual plot in a story, this is definitely not for you. I personally don't mind. I don't mind things that are kind of plotless sometimes. However, I still had kind of a mixed reaction to this book, even though I very much knew when I was going in what it was that I was going to get. And my reason for that was I felt like what this novella did was it took all the beautiful aspects of Patrick Rothfuss's writing and then just kind of magnified them, which is great, I guess, and then took out all other elements of his writing. So it was just like the most beautiful, most evocative, most literary phrases and not that much else. And I don't know, to me, I just couldn't totally love that. I felt kind of mixed about it because it did remind me why I loved his writing. It's the first new thing I've read by him in 10 years. And I don't blame him for writing the story either. I think it is something that he really connected to, and you can feel that. However, it did come across to me as kind of self-indulgent because it was taking his writing style to such an extreme. I was talking to Daniel about this on the phone when I was trying to decide if I should even do this video, and in the end I decided to do it, and he was sort of asking me what I meant by self-indulgent because that is a term that I use a lot to describe books that I don't like. So I'll tell you guys what I told him, which is, to me, I can really respect if an author does something and executes it perfectly, and I can tell they really brought their vision to life, and I just happened to hate it for whatever reason, like it wasn't for me, but I think they've done creatively exactly what they set out to do. It really works. I just don't like it. I respect that so much more than the author that has fallen so in love with their own idea that they don't know how it's going to come off to the reader. So to me, that second thing is what I tend to call self-indulgence, where I can feel like the author has just had this idea in their head for so long, or they're just so attached to the character or the concept or, whatever it is about this story, that they have lost the ability to tell how the reader is going to feel about it. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which is a book I reviewed recently, is a book that I definitely feel like crossed the line into self-indulgence. And I feel like The Slow Regard of Silent Things kind of did that as well, because he did not restrain himself in his writing or in the concept or in any degree. He just fully gave in without, in my opinion, a lot of distance from how this story was going to come off. And I think he knew that, and I think a lot of people have still connected to it. But to my mind, I feel like if the author had been able to gain a little more distance on this story, it might have been something that more readers would enjoy. There's also an aspect of it that I found a little bit hard to digest, which is that Ori, the main and only real character, is a character who is basically dealing with some form of mental illness, maybe kind of OCD, because she spends a lot of time in her own world trying to figure out how to perfectly arrange all of these inanimate objects, and she has this very profound connection to the world around her and to all of these inanimate objects in the story. And really, the narrative is just about her dealing with this perception of the world and how she's interacting with it and how she's viewing things. And this is a world where objects and like the names of things really do have power, and the study of this sometimes does make people become mentally unbalanced. And she is someone who, as it's described, has cracked. She has basically run away from university, and she is living basically underneath the university in a very unhealthy condition, really. But she's, in a way, happy sometimes in her own world that she's kind of created around herself, and you really only get that world. You really only get that viewpoint. So to some extent, it feels like this very beautiful, evocative portrait of somebody that is seriously unwell, and that's a little bit disturbing to me. I don't think it is a fantasy world. I don't think it's in any way glorifying something that shouldn't be glorified or anything like that. It's just when you really think about it, it's kind of uncomfortable. And you can see that the story was written with great feeling and great sympathy for where she is coming from. And it's just, it's actually not an easy perspective to be in when you really think about it. So yes, this is basically 150 pages, although there's not a lot of text per page, and there are some very beautiful illustrations. It's 150 pages about a girl running around underground arranging objects and trying to figure out where different things go. But it's very beautifully written. So I don't regret having read it. It was nice to revisit Patrick Rothfuss's writing. I don't feel like it necessarily complements the rest of the series all of that well. It does very much stand apart from the Kingkiller Chronicle, and unless you really love Ori in particular, I think you can probably skip this one, but there's no harm in reading it. I think, as the author himself said, this is something that certain people will really enjoy and a lot of people just will not get. I feel like with this one, I fell somewhere in the middle, and that is kind of common for me. I feel like sometimes I fall very much in the middle of things that I should have a strong opinion of, so oh well, there you have it. I also wanted to address the way a lot of people seem to feel that this was just a total money grab on the part of the author. I really don't think that's the case. Obviously, I can't speak for anyone else, but I really got the impression that this is a story that he felt really intimately when he was writing, that he has a very close connection to this character and to this story, and that it felt really personal to him. I don't think that he wrote this to be a cash grab, for sure. Now, I think you could perhaps conceivably take the opinion that it was a cash grab on the part of his publisher to publish it. In the acknowledgements, Patrick Rothfuss does talk about the fact that he actually intended to offer this to a small publisher. This was not something he intended to offer to Daw Books until his agent reminded him that they had right of first refusal, and his editor at Daw actually really wanted to publish it. So I feel like, given that, I don't think he was really intending to publish this as like a book in his series or anything like that. I think the publisher was probably so excited to have anything by him at all that they decided to go for it. And I think I understand why, given the amount of story in the book, people felt a little bit disappointed to have paid for that. You know, I understand those feelings, but I don't think it was anything malicious on the part of Patrick Rothfuss. And of course, that's just my opinion. I can't read his mind, but I think it's just a story that he wrote. It came from a heartfelt place, and you have to separate that from whatever decisions got made by the publishing industry. Since I'm making this video, I might as well talk a little bit about how I feel about the Kingkiller Chronicle, because it's such a tough subject in fantasy anyway. The Name of the Wind is one of my all-time favorite books. It probably always will be, and that's because it just came at a very particular time in my life. I really stopped reading fantasy during my mid to late teens, and The Name of the Wind was the book that really recaptured the magic of fantasy for me and got me reading in the genre again. So just for that, if for nothing else, I'm always going to love that book, and it's always going to be special to me. And aside from that, I also really love how Patrick Rothfuss writes about Kvothe as a musician. I think for an author that's not a musician, this is probably one of the best portrayals of what it's like to be a musician that I've seen in any book. fantasy or non-fantasy. I also did enjoy The Wise Man's Fear. I haven't read it as many times as The Name of the Wind. I've probably read it twice. Of course, it was hard waiting from 2008 to 2011 when The Wise Man's Fear came out. And of course, it has now been 10 years since he published a main book in the Kingkiller Chronicle. And obviously, he has gone through some personal struggles during that time. And to be honest, I have a lot of sympathy for him. I know a lot of people are upset about authors that don't publish books, and I kind of understand that, but I've never really been able to feel that way. Of course, I wish I could have the end of the trilogy. Of course, it's hard knowing that there's this series that I really enjoy that might never be finished, but I also just have so much sympathy for his position, which is, I mean, I used to really procrastinate on my essays in high school and college. And a lot of that came from perfectionism. I would be really worried that whatever I was going to write wasn't going to be good. So I would just put off writing that until, I really had no choice because the deadline was approaching. But in Patrick Rothfuss's case, there is no real deadline anymore. Like, I'm sure he had deadlines at some point, they've passed. Now, there's no date he's supposed to deliver the book by. And instead of like an essay for some class, it's the third volume of his acclaimed best selling fantasy trilogy that at least hundreds of thousands of people are waiting for. And they want it to be a good ending. And he has waited and waited. And I don't know. Again, I can't read his mind. I don't know if he's written anything or not, but I can't imagine how much pressure he's been under. And I know he's also had some struggles with depression and mental illness and things like that. So I have so much sympathy for the position he's in. If he doesn't deliver the book, people are going to be mad. But if he delivers it and people don't like it, that's going to be really hard too. I think it's fine that in the fantasy community we joke about authors that don't finish books, that it's, become a bit of a thing. We can joke about Patrick Rothfuss, we can joke about George R.R. Martin, we can even joke about Brandon Sanderson finishing everyone's series. Like, it's fine to have a little bit of humor about it, but I think I do genuinely feel sorry for authors that are struggling to finish their books. I know it's not easy, and I think while it's not bad to joke a little bit, I think it's important to have compassion for those authors as well. They are just people. They want to write a book that you're going to enjoy. I know some people take the position that an author owes their readers nothing, that each book comes on its own, you take what you get, and that the author, does not owe the reader to finish the series or anything else, that you just enjoy what you have as a reader, and, if you're lucky, you'll get the whole series. I don't necessarily agree with that, not because I think it's such a horrible point of view, but just because I don't think authors generally feel that way. I think authors feel like they want their readers to get to finish the story. So that might be a bit extreme, but in general, I definitely have a lot of sympathy for authors that are struggling to finish the next book or the last book in a very popular series. So those were my opinions on the slow regard of silent things and on Patrick Rothfuss in general. I don't know if anyone really cared about those opinions, but if you did, there they are.